Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 31 of The Kill File. Okay, so before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to say a few things. First, I wanted to say that I recently switched hosting platforms. I'm now on Spotify as a hosting platform. So if you're listening to one of the episodes and you hear some clicks and pops, just know that I'm still figuring out the platforms and why it's different on listening platforms. It's actually not in the audio itself, it's the platform. So if you're having a hard time hearing it, or if it's doing some things that are just annoying, make sure that you try to switch platforms just for a little bit. Maybe go to Spotify, which is free. I noticed it on my Amazon platform, Amazon Music. When I was listening, it was driving me crazy, but I heard other people didn't hear it at all. So if you do hear some noises, just know that it's because I switched platforms and it should work itself out eventually. Also, I wanted to let you guys know that if there was any reason that you guys didn't get your episodes in a certain place, I apologize. Write me if you need me to fix anything. I believe I was able to distribute them to all of the regular ones, but you never know. And along with that, I recently found out, as far as advertisers and sponsors for a podcast go, they only actually look at downloads that you get a month. So apparently, I didn't know this, but no platforms, with the exception of like one or two, count how many listeners you have or how many people are streaming it, because they only count the downloads you get. So you have to get a certain amount before you can start looking for sponsors, etc. So if you're interested in helping me out or The Kill File, you can hit that little button next to where you hit play, and on the platform, it's usually the download button. This will help count for how many people are actually listening to the episodes instead of streaming it. It shouldn't download to your device itself. It should just download it to your Spotify account or whatever. It makes it so you can actually access it from anywhere, anytime. So if you're not in a great Wi-Fi place, or if your phone doesn't have a lot of service at the time, you should still be able to listen to it without any problems. I really want to get some sponsors so I can start growing The Kill File and upgrading stuff and setting up marketing and stuff. As always, I am so very grateful for each and every one of you. Seriously, if no one listened, then I wouldn't be doing this. And for me, and hopefully you, this is so much fun and interesting, and hopefully you learn a little something. That's it for business talk today. Let's get on to today's case. It's a familiar one that most of us, at least by name, have heard of. We are going to cover the O.J. Simpson case. I decided I wanted to do this case because, to be completely honest, I was young when most of this stuff happened. His wife died in 1994, which means I was 8. And that's why I don't know shit about this story. Of course, we've all heard the big stuff. People say that he got away with murder, O.J. was a football player, and that he wasn't convicted because the glove didn't fit. And of course, the infamous white Bronco car chase, but that's all I know. Literally, that is every single thing that I know. Not long ago, something was brought up about him. I was like, you know what? I really want to know his story. OJ died last year in April, and now, since his story came to an end, I want to know everything there was about it. For this case, I have a few sources, and one of which is the new docuseries that came out called American Manhunt O.J. Simpson. It's on Netflix if you're interested in watching it. It goes into way more depth than I will here, as it's a long case. I won't be able to delve into everything, but it's just one of the resources I used. But it was a good watch. I will also list the rest of my sources in the show notes. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder and domestic abuse. Let's jump in. Orenthal James Simpson, nicknamed OJ, was born in San Francisco, California in 1947 on July 9th to parents Jimmy Lee Simpson and Eunice Simpson. It was said that his aunt was actually the person who came up with the name Orenthal. I guess it was one of the names of her favorite French actors. It was said that Eunice mainly raised the kids in the home as the father was not present after the couple split in 1952. This included her raising OJ, his brother, and 2 sisters. Apparently, when OJ was just 2 years old, he contracted something called rickets, which, after researching rickets, is the softening or weakening of bones in children and can be caused by prolonged and an extreme deficiency of vitamin D. This would cause OJ to end up being bow-legged and pigeon-toed, which means their toes are pointed in when they walk, as well as having really skinny legs. I guess Eunice could not afford braces that OJ would need for his legs, so she made him wear some shoes that were connected to an iron bar every day, basically until he was 5. It was said that OJ was not the easiest child to raise, and at the age of 13, he joined his first gang and engaged in the gang fights that followed. OJ would later say about this time that he only beat guys up that quote-unquote deserved it, and this was an almost every weekend occurrence. OJ played football for his high school called Galileo High School, and because his grades were poor, he didn't get offered any type of scholarships. He attended City College of San Francisco, where he would break the junior college records, and because of this, he ended up being heavily recruited, where OJ would decide that he wanted to attend Southern Cal, which was said to be the only school that he really wanted to play for. One moment that stood out during his time playing was when he led his team to victory in the Rose Bowl against Indiana. He apparently had a 64-yard touchdown with some moves that would win them the game after the touchdown. In OJ's senior year at college, he would set a record for the NCAA for the most rushing yards in a regular season, which would end up being 1,709 yards, and then another for most carried with 355. OJ would end up being the number 1 draft pick in 1969, where the Buffalo Bills would take him. However, the first couple of years with Buffalo would prove to be very frustrating for OJ, as the head coach at the time, John Rauch, sorry if I'm butchering that, and Harvey Johnson didn't think that it was a good idea to build their offense around OJ. After this, Lou Saban would take over in 1972, and he easily saw OJ's outstanding abilities and knew that the more carries OJ got, the better he was going to get. OJ then in 1973 led the league with 1,251 rushing yards, and then he broke the record of 2,000 yards in a season when he played in the snowy Shea Stadium. OJ would suffer some injuries in 1974, which wouldn't be his best season. But then in 1975, he rushed for 1,817 yards and scored 23 touchdowns. And following this, the next season, he would win his final title for rushing yards with 1,503 yards. For any of my non-football listeners, all of this meant that OJ was a running back for the Buffalo Bills, and he was damn good at evading tackles and gaining yards. We're almost done with the football talk for those of you who don't have a clue what I'm saying. I think this is important to show just how popular OJ was to America. So again, getting hurt in 1977, he could only play 7 games that season when he would be traded to the 49ers. And unfortunately for the 49ers, they would trade 5 draft picks for him, including the number 1 draft pick, and they quickly figured out that he had not been worth the price. In his last 2 seasons in the NFL, he averaged less than 4 yards a carry, with a total of only 1,053 yards those 2 seasons, which, after, OJ would then retire. OJ then went on to do some acting, which according to those around him, he absolutely loved. He acted in things like Cassandra Crossing, The Towering Inferno, and probably his most famous, Naked Gun. I just have to say that after researching OJ's story, I had absolutely no idea how much he acted. It blew me away. Again, I was young, so don't judge me, but he was in a lot of stuff. I guess he also tried his hand in sports casting, but he was highly criticized for being poorly spoken. But because of his great personality, some people still loved him. OJ would go on to marry his first wife and high school sweetheart, Marguerite L. Whitley, when OJ was just 19 years old. The couple would be married nearly a decade and had 3 children. Although during one of the documentaries, a police officer claimed that OJ was abusive with his first wife, Marguerite claimed that there was no way she would have ever let him hit her or abuse her, saying, quote, "If he did, he would have gotten a frying pan upside the head." It was also stated in an interview with Vogue that Marguerite thought OJ was innocent of his crimes, that we will get into shortly. 2 years before OJ divorced his first wife, so I'm not sure if they were separated at this time or what, as I didn't hear anything of any affairs concerning OJ, but who knows. Anyways, in 1977, Nicole Brown was an 18-year-old young woman when she actually first met OJ. Nicole at the time was a waitress at a nightclub in Beverly Hills where OJ was one evening. At the time Nicole had met OJ, she had no idea who he was or anything of his football career. Nicole was a community college student who wanted to be a model and a photographer. She was gorgeous. Apparently, after the couple started dating, Nicole would drop out of college and move in with OJ, who had been 30 at the time. And this was just months after they met. Later on, Denise Brown, who was Nicole Brown's older sister, spoke to the fact that just 8 months into their relationship, where they were both definitely in love with one another, Nicole would get her first glimpse into the other side of OJ. Apparently, OJ became completely enraged when he would see one of their male friends give a kiss to Nicole's cheek. Denise would later on say in the article in Today, quote, "When he got back to the house, all hell broke loose," end quote. It was said that during this time of meeting and dating Nicole, OJ was still married to Marguerite, and they had at the time shared a son named Jason, a daughter named Darnell, and another baby on the way. In 1979, OJ would go on to divorce his first wife And unfortunately, tragedy would strike OJ and Marguerite when their youngest daughter, named Erin, would pass away at just 23 months old. Horrible. I found in one source, Erin unfortunately drowned in the family pool, where she was found shortly after, but she was already unconscious. After EMTs arrived, they were able to revive little Erin with CPR and rush her to the University of California Medical Center, UCLA. She would then be in a coma for a few days, in the hospital before she would be put on life support, and sadly, the baby girl would pass away a few short days later from respiratory failure on August 26, 1979. Nicole and OJ would go on to be married in February of 1985 in a lovely ceremony where the couple looked so happy. Later that year, on October 17th, the couple would welcome their first child together, a baby girl who they named Sydney. 3 short years later, the couple would welcome their second child, a son named Justin. It was said that Nicole was a fantastic mother and took to motherhood well. She enjoyed letting her kids just be kids and always wanted them to just have the most fun. On January 1st, 1989 would be one of many incidents where 911 was called from the Simpson home. When the authorities came to the home, they witnessed Nicole running out of the bushes as she was screaming, quote, "He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me." It was said that at this time, she had injuries from alleged domestic violence. She was said to have a black eye, an imprint of a hand on her neck, and a cut lip, which led Nicole to be treated at the hospital. At this time, it was said this was just one of 8 different times the police had already come to the Simpson house. But this was the first time that Simpson was finally arrested and charged with abuse of his spouse. I remember on the documentary American Manhunt, O.J. Simpson, one of the main officers of the case, a man named Detective Furman, which we will get to know better later on, was actually called at one point. He arrived at the Simpson house. Nicole was standing next to what was said to be a Mercedes convertible, and the windshield of the car was smashed. Nicole was said to have been standing there sobbing, and O.J. was standing there holding a baseball bat. When Detective Furman came up to Nicole and asked her if she was okay and wanted to make a report because otherwise the authorities couldn't do anything, Nicole responded with, "No, she was fine." At that time, Detective Furman made a comment to her that he says he still thinks about to this day, saying, quote, "It's your life." 4 months after the New Year's Eve incident where OJ was finally charged, he would plead no contest for the abuse, and he was sentenced to just 120 hours of community service, a $200 fine, and 2 years of probation. This is just my opinion, but seeing that this man had already shown a pattern of abuse towards his wife with the numerous 911 calls to the home, I feel like he got off pretty easy for putting his hands on his wife yet again. At the time of the abuse in 1989, Nicole would call her sister Denise and ask if she would be willing to take pictures of her for documentation of the abuse and some proof. There was also said to be a journal of sorts documenting the different abuse from OJ. In 1992, Nicole would file for divorce from OJ as she had cited quote-unquote irreconcilable differences. I wish for her sake that she would have been able to make a clean break from her abuser, but we know all too well how hard that can be and how dangerous. Although the couple was officially divorced, Nicole and OJ did try to reconcile their marriage, but it didn't last for long. There was another incident where 911 would be called on October 25th, 1993, where Nicole actually called twice and was shouting that OJ had broken into her home and said that he was going nuts, and she said that he was going to beat the shit out of her. Let me tell you guys how scary the 911 call was. They played parts of it on the documentary, but I also found the 911 call transcript, in particular where Nicole is terrified that OJ had broken down her back door. Then he went home, then he came back. He wasn't drunk or on drugs, but he was screaming at her about something he read in a magazine or something. The dispatcher was sending the police but stayed on with Nicole, and she could hear OJ. When the dispatcher asked if she thought that he was going to hit her, she said, "I don't know." She tried asking OJ to leave many times, and during one part, OJ said, quote, "I'm leaving with my 2 fucking fists is when I'm leaving. You ain't gotta worry about me anymore," end quote. I'm not quite sure if that even makes a lot of sense, but I think it can kind of give you the picture of the fact that he was in an enraged state, and he may not have been making a whole lot of sense. When the dispatcher was asking what he was saying or yelling about when she couldn't hear, Nicole said something about him screaming about something from a long time ago, but said that it always came back. When the dispatcher asked if this has happened before, she replied, quote, "Many times." She also made it clear that at first she was going to hang up because she was afraid OJ would beat her if he knew that she was on the phone with 911. And then later when the dispatcher asked if he knew who she was talking to, she said no. At one point, the dispatcher asked what he was doing, and Nicole said that he was going nuts. OJ started banging on a door that was locked and was freaking out. The whole time their kids were upstairs, thankfully sleeping, but Nicole did state that she was upstairs sleeping as well in the beginning. They were all sleeping, and he broke down the back door and almost broke down a door upstairs to get to Nicole. So she got out of there because she didn't want anything to happen with the kids, which is also why she wasn't heading back up the stairs. Aside from the collection of pictures Nicole started to keep about OJ's abuse, she also started a diary of sorts, or letters that she had written to OJ about the incidents. One of the letters, according to an article in the Washington Post, said, quote, "You beat the holy hell out of me, and we lied at the x-ray lab and said that I fell off a bike," end quote. This letter was in reference to something that happened in 1986. Then there had been another letter that was found where Nicole was actually trying to take the blame for what was happening, and this one breaks my fucking heart because she was a victim of domestic abuse, and so often abusers are able to make their partners think that it's somehow their fault or that they won't be able to live without them or be without them. It's awful. It's brainwashing is exactly what it is. In this letter, Nicole wrote, quote, "I'm the one who was controlling. Please let us be a family again and let me love you better than I ever have before," end quote. Apparently, after the couple was divorced, Nicole told her mother at one point that she knew OJ had been stalking or following her, that he would show up to numerous places at the same time as her, or he would be following her in his car while she was driving. There was a point in time that Nicole actually had apparently called a woman's shelter and was asking for advice on how to deal with her ex-husband threatening to kill her. One neighbor who actually testified during the trial said that about 6 months before Nicole's death, he actually witnessed a person prowling Nicole's house really late one evening, and that this person was sort of watching through the windows trying to see what was happening inside one particular part of the house, and he could see that this person was O.J. Simpson. Another friend of the couple, Cato, who ends up being involved in the evening of the murders, said that he had also been witness to fights where O.J. had gone psycho and had broken down the French doors, and that is when Nicole told their friend Cato that O.J. was actually a crazy man. One of the important detectives of this homicide in this case, and my personal favorite to watch on the documentary, was Tom Lang, who said in his opinion he thought OJ was a sociopath who did not have a conscience of guilt or anything, and that he could just turn on and off his emotions. And in my opinion, those are the scariest types. Okay, let's get to the night of the murders. Now, one thing that I'm going to say here is that there will be a lot of people's names thrown out here, but I'm only going to tell you the ones who matter the most. And right off the bat, after we talk about this night of the murders, I will tell you the 4 main detectives on this case, as they will have things to say and play different roles. So, on the night of June 12, 1994, it was said that there was a recital that evening that OJ had attended, and also there was Nicole and some of her family members. After the recital, Nicole's family was going to go to dinner at a restaurant called Mezzaluna, and it was stated that OJ had been notified by somebody that he was not invited to dinner. OJ and Nicole were no longer together at this point, which means he was no longer a part of her family, and that makes sense. At some point during breakups, you have to be able to draw that line, and your family is supposed to have your back after the split, although some families are shitty, and they don't do that for their loved one. Nicole was lucky enough to have a family that did. They were supportive of her probably because they all knew that OJ was abusive, and were probably happy that their daughter was hopefully safer and happier. So that night at dinner, it was said that Nicole's mother, Judith, had realized later on that evening that she had forgotten or lost her glasses, presumably at the restaurant. When Judith called Nicole about it, Nicole let her mom know that she would call the restaurant and ask them to look for them. When Nicole called the restaurant, someone at the restaurant had answered and was talking with her about the glasses. Another employee actually went outside to see where they were, and they were able to locate them by the bushes, or something to that effect. The employee came back in and put them in an envelope, and it was said at this time that Ron Goldman, who knew Nicole, as they were friends, and they all lived in the same area called Brentwood. They all kind of ran in the same circles, so he was a friend of Nicole's. He said that he would just take the glasses by Nicole's house when he got off later that evening. He knew where she lived. Fast forward a few hours, and a neighbor of Nicole named Stephen Schwab was out walking his dog when he ran into an Akita standing there alone on the corner, and he thought the dog was lost. When Stephen took his own dog, and now this lost dog, back to his house, Bettina Rasmussen saw Stephen bring in this other dog, so together they decided to just go ahead and walk the dog to see if maybe it knew its way home or would know where it is once they got close to it. Bettina remembered that the dog was white and had some stuff around the bottom of its paws that at the time Bettina thought was mud. Finally, during their walk, the dog went up to a walkway of a home, and they figured that the dog knew that this was its house. As Bettina followed the dog up the walkway towards the home, she was able to see blood on the walkway leading to the home, and she yelled to Stephen that they needed to call 911 because she could see a dead body. This house was the house of Nicole Brown Simpson, and it was located on Bundy Drive. Later on, the detectives are going to talk about the two separate crime scenes, and it can get a little confusing. So when anyone in this case talks about Bundy, they're talking about Nicole's home on Bundy Drive, which I know it's weird since when we hear Bundy, it usually makes us think Ted Bundy. It actually took me a while to shake that as well. One of the first, if not the first, officers on the scene was a D2, which is a detective sergeant. That was part of the homicide division in LA, and of course is part of the LAPD. His name was Mark Furman. We are going to hear about him a lot. At this time, Mark had 19 years of experience. One of the next officers that was on the scene was Brad Roberts. They found at the scene a woman laying at the bottom of the set of stairs in a black dress, completely drenched in blood, and they also found a male victim covered in blood in the bushes next to the walkway. Nicole had been severely slashed and almost decapitated. Both victims were deceased, however, the authorities weren't sure upon first glance what had happened here. They did see at the crime scene a dark stocking cap as well as one large black glove, which looked to be leather. They could also see footprints of a shoe in blood as well that was leading towards the back of the property. When one of the officers entered the house, they saw a piece of mail with the return address on it with names, and this is when they realized that this was the residence of Nicole Brown Simpson, OJ's ex-wife. At the scene, they were also able to see a bloody envelope that was between the two victims, and inside had been a pair of eyeglasses. They thought that the attack on the victim seemed to be stabbings or slashings, maybe done with a knife. Now we are going to head over to what would end up being the second crime scene, and this would be the current house of O.J. Simpson. And this house was located on a street called Rockingham Avenue. So later on, when we reference the crime scenes or houses, keep in mind that Bundy is Nicole's house and the murder scene, and Rockingham is O.J.'s house and the second crime scene. So around 10:52 that evening, there was a house guest who we spoke of earlier that was staying in one of the bungalow houses on OJ's property, and this man's name was Cato Kalin. That evening, Cato was on the phone with a friend, and while he was on the phone, he heard 3 loud thumping or pounding noises, and when he looked towards the south wall where it was coming from, he noticed that the picture that was hanging there had moved to sit crooked instead of straight as it had been. At the time, Cato thought that there had been an earthquake, and in fact, he would end up asking many people that night if there was one. Just a few minutes later, he hears a buzzing or a ring noise and thought it was coming from the front gate. So when he goes down the path to see who was buzzing, he saw that it was a limo with a driver in it. When Cato approached the limo, he asked the driver if they had just had an earthquake, to which the driver said he didn't think so. While the limo driver was sitting there buzzing the house, he observed a dark figure come out of the shadows towards the entrance of the house. This male figure was described as 6'2" and about 200 pounds, a black male, headed towards the front door. When the limo driver was still buzzing, finally OJ answered the intercom and said that he had overslept and had just come out of the shower and would be down in a sec. OJ was now in what was said to be a rush to get to the airport for his Chicago flight. When the limo driver popped the trunk, the limo driver and Cato were helping put OJ's luggage into the trunk when Cato noticed that there was a small black duffel bag still on the ground, to which he had told OJ he would go grab. OJ immediately said, quote, No, I'll get that. This is when Cato would say that he distinctly remembers that being a weird interaction and had wondered to himself why OJ wouldn't want him to grab that bag for him. He thought it was weird. Then OJ tells the limo driver they gotta go. So now, at the LAX airport, a man named Skip Junis was at LAX to pick up his wife from a flight. He observed OJ get out of the limo, and of course he recognized him because OJ was famous. He watched/heard OJ tell the limo driver to get a skycap. I had to look up what a skycap was. I've never heard of that. I saw that they used to have employees at airports that would just assist passengers with their luggage, usually like a curbside check-in service or something. Anyways, the limo driver got the skycap, and Skip remembered seeing OJ do something very odd. He stated that it was weird because OJ had all of this luggage that was all Louis Vuitton, obviously expensive, but he wouldn't let the limo driver or the skycap touch this small duffel bag that looked to be made of a cheap canvas cloth. When Skip saw OJ grab the cheap bag, he put it over his shoulder and headed directly to the airport trash can, which he thought was weird. Like, why would you arrive at an airport and go straight to the trash can? Then Skip claimed to have seen OJ grab something that he described as a long item that he thought had been wrapped in some sort of cloth, and he threw it away. Unfortunately, during the trial, this man was never called as a witness. Now, real quick, we are going to go back in time just a little to talk about another witness who would never be called to testify. Around 10:45 that night, so just a little before Cato heard the pounding noises, a woman named Jill Shively, who was also a resident of Brentwood, stated that she was driving to a market that was located in Brentwood called the Westward Ho. Oh my god, I love this name. That's so fantastic. Anyways, she stated as she was approaching a street called Bundy, she saw a white SUV run the red light and drove up on the median and then stopped, almost hitting her car. This is just a few blocks from Nicole's house. She said the driver had to stop where they did because there was another car behind it. And this witness stated that the driver of the white SUV gave her a really mean look and then started yelling at her as if she was the one who did something wrong when he was the one who ran the red light. She said he screamed out of the window, quote, "Get the car out of here! Get out! Move!" She immediately knew this man. She recognized his voice and had stated that she had just seen him in a movie called The Naked Gun, which starred O.J. Simpson. Unfortunately, this witness would never be called to testify as she mistakenly sold her story at the time of the chaos of the crime for what was said to be about $5,000, which a bunch of people were apparently doing, and who couldn't use the extra money. She didn't know that it would make it to where she couldn't testify at the trial of O.J., and obviously this would have been a huge witness for the prosecution. Okay, so far we have the murders happening, then O.J. is seen rushing in the area, then we have Cato who thought he heard an earthquake, a limo driver who sees a man going up to the front door of O.J.'s home, and a witness who sees O.J. throw something away at the airport and then O.J. leaves for Chicago. Now we are going to head back to the first crime scene on Bundy where Nicole and a man were found both deceased. The man that was found by Nicole that was also deceased, unfortunately, was a friend of Nicole from the restaurant that night who was just there to drop off her mother's glasses to her, Ron Goldman. Ron was only 25 years old when he was murdered, and he was a young man from Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Ron had a younger sister, Kim, who was also on the documentary I watched, and I just have to say, I absolutely loved her. She spoke to the fact that she did not want to be there doing this documentary. She didn't want to do things like that, but if she stopped doing things like that, then Ron would be left out of the story. She felt that loved ones of victims or survivors of incidents like this should be doing things like these interviews because she feels that if it can soften your heart with regards to the victims and make the story more about the victims rather than the murderer, then it's her duty to educate anyone she can. It seemed as though Kim and Ron were really close, and you could tell how much she loved her brother. It was heartbreaking. She spoke to the fact that she had come home from work, so that same day of the murders, but just later on that evening, and her boyfriend told her that she needed to call her dad, to which she said something to the tune of, "I just walked through the door, I'm good." This is when her boyfriend said, "No, you need to call your dad." She stated she remembered falling to her knees when she heard the news. Okay, back to the crime scene and the night of the murders. When Mark Furman went back into the house on Bundy, so Nicole's house, his boss, Detective Phillips, which is the second main detective, came inside and said that the Robbery and Homicide Division was going to be taking over the case and that they needed to just wait for their instructions. Tom Lang was in the Robbery Homicide Division. He is the third main detective. So Tom Lang was in the Robbery Homicide Division and Homicide Specials, which meant that he worked high-profile cases such as serial killers or famous people, and he had about 200 to 250 cases under his belt. This is the third main detective. Again, I absolutely love this guy. He just seemed like a straight shooter who thought all of the media circus that was surrounding this case was absolute nonsense, and he made it very clear he was a hoot. His partner at the time was a man named Phil Van Hatter. Phil Van Hatter would be the fourth main detective on this case. Thankfully, during all of the horribleness, the children were asleep upstairs when the authorities found them, and then they were taken out of the garage, not having to see anything. They were taken to a police station until they could get a hold of O.J. At the crime scene, the detectives were able to find the shoe prints and blood, and they also noticed that right next to each shoe print, there was a blood splatter on the left side. This indicated to authorities that whoever did this had been injured somewhere on their left side, and that person too was bleeding. During the investigation of the crime scene, when they figured out this was Nicole, they decided they needed to go find O.J. and talk to him. His house was a mere 4.5-minute drive from Nicole's. The authorities would end up timing this a few times later on. When they arrived to O.J.'s residence, no one answered the phone at the entrance of the gate. However, they did see parked in front of the huge metal gate, so outside of the gate, was a white Bronco, which at the time they didn't realize belonged to O.J. As they wanted to see if this vehicle had anything to do with the crime, officers looked around the Bronco as Detective Furman sees what he believed to be a small blood spot near the handle of the door. At this point, seeing something that they thought to be blood, they now had an obligation as officers of the law to make sure that there wasn't an emergency going on inside this location, as well as to ensure that everyone here was safe. They scaled the gate or the wall and made it over. When authorities saw the first bungalow, they knocked on the door and Cato answered. When the officers asked who lived in the second bungalow, he tells them Arnell, OJ's daughter, lived in the second one. 3 out of the 4 detectives rushed over to Arnell's bungalow, while Furman said that since they have no idea who this man is, he wasn't leaving him or turning his back to him. Instead, he stood there chatting with Cato. When Detective Furman was talking to Cato, Cato described the noises he had heard and asked Furman if there was an earthquake that night. At this, Detective Furman said he just froze, and he realized he needed to look behind the wall where the picture was to see if there was anything going on. This is when Detective Furman would find a glove on the ground surrounded by blood that seemed to match or at least look very similar to the glove that they had found at the Bundy house. In this moment, he knew this was a crime scene. When the officers rushed to Arnell's bungalow, Lang asked Arnell what was going on at the big house, and she said she didn't know anything, but she did have a key. With that, they entered OJ's house, where there was a plethora of evidence that would be found. However, some of it would not make it into the case. When Furman brought the glove up to Van Hatter's attention, remember it was now Lang and Van Hatter's case, they were taking point because of their division. Van Hatter sent Furman back to the Bundy location to make sure they got pictures of the first glove and to make sure that there was a left hand and a right hand, possibly indicating a match. Furman, back at the Bundy residence, said that he had to maneuver around the blood, not to step in it, and be able to point to where the glove was for photos as they wanted to make sure that it was in its original place so they could use it as evidence. Once the detectives knew that no one was in the residence, and with the discovery of the glove, Lang commented that now they would need a warrant to search anything. Eventually, of course, they would. Meanwhile, Ron Phillips, who again was Detective Furman's boss, one of the main 4 on the case, called OJ and told them that they had found Nicole deceased. Phillips said that on the phone, OJ said something to the tune of, "Oh my God, Nicole is dead." Then, when Phillips said that they needed him to come as soon as possible because they had his kids, and of course figured that he would want to be with them, when OJ questioned why his kids were at the police station, Phillips let them know they had nowhere else to take them. Lang said what struck him weird with the conversation of OJ and the authorities is that OJ didn't ask what happened. Lang said it's usual for loved ones to ask what happened or why this would happen or like who would do such a thing, but the lack of any of those questions from OJ made it very odd. Now Tom Lang was tasked with calling Nicole's family and giving them the bad news, which he stated is obviously the absolute worst part of being a police officer. Lang stated in the documentary that when he called Nicole's mother and gave her the devastating news that Judith was screaming, quote, "That motherfucker, that son of a bitch killed her." When Denise Brown found out about her sister's death, the first thing that she said was, quote, "Oh my God, he finally did it." When Lang asked who did it, Denise was screaming that it was OJ, and she knew that he was the one who killed her. This same morning of the discovery of the bodies, the media caught wind of what had happened and completely swarmed the Bundy residence. Of course, having media everywhere can compromise a crime scene, and they tried their best to keep it secure. But they did have a problem in that Nicole was exposed to all of the cameras. Obviously, the authorities didn't want anything to happen to the potential evidence on Nicole, so one of the detectives grabbed a blanket from inside to at least partially cover up Nicole's deceased body from the media. Back at the Rockingham residence, as daylight hit, Detective Furman and another detective that was also on the scene, Brad Roberts, were looking over the Bronco again to see if they could see any more blood or anything now that it was light out. Now they could see that there was blood all over the inside of the white Bronco, and Brad actually found some droplets of blood that led from the rear of the Bronco all the way to the front door of the house. Another key person in this case was a man named Ron Shipp, who was an officer of the LAPD and a longtime friend of OJ, and also he was friends with Nicole. He got a call from his own mother, who then told him that OJ's ex-wife was murdered. When Shipp called OJ's house to see what was going on, Detective Mark Furman answered the phone. When Shipp asked him if it was true that Nicole was murdered, Furman said yes. Then Shipp asked if OJ did it, to which Furman said he couldn't answer that. Now let's talk really quickly about what was found inside of OJ's home and why some of it didn't make it into evidence. Mark Furman was one of the people searching the home, and one of the people that were with him, I believe, was Officer Brad Roberts. They both found a few interesting things. One thing that was found was blood all over some medical bandages that were inside of a medical cabinet in the bathroom. It was left open. This would not make it into evidence. There was also reportedly a bloody fingerprint on a light switch in the laundry room, which also didn't make it into evidence. Neither did the freshly washed and still wet clothing that was laying inside the washer. The last thing that didn't make it into evidence was said to be a knife box that was sitting out and empty. Why didn't these things make it into evidence, you ask? Well, from what I have learned, Mark Furman wrote the notes about the evidence in a notebook, and then he handed it to his boss, Phillips, as this was no longer his case. Furman then saw Phillips hand it to Van Hatter and stated that Van Hatter opened his own notebook, stuck the notes inside, shut it, and put it under his arm. Now, this is where on the documentary I watched some drama that came in, and it was so funny to me. Detective Lang said that they should not have had to wait and read about evidence in some notes, and was saying that if someone finds evidence, it's important and they have to tell someone to make sure that it gets taken into evidence. He was obviously upset, feeling like Mark Furman didn't do his job well, and because of that, so much evidence was missed. He then outright said that Furman wouldn't be lying, would he? It was so funny and will make sense later on. One thing that they did find were some black socks laid on the floor on a rug at the foot of the bed. These would later on be tested for blood. All of the blood in the Bronco was also tested and taken to the police station for further searching and testing. And finally, the blood at the crime scene would also be tested, although these things would take a little while. Apparently, while some of the officers were searching OJ's house, they see OJ come walking up the driveway of the Rockingham residence, so where OJ lives. A cop ran up to OJ and said that he could not go in the house. Then the officer handcuffed him and stood there with him. When Van Hatter made his way to OJ, he had to explain why he was there, because OJ was surprised by the police swarming his residence. He asked one of the officers why they were all there, and they told him that they found blood leading from the Bronco all the way up to his house. And they said this is when OJ became quiet and started sweating and kept saying, "Oh man, oh man." Van Hatter decided to then take OJ to Park Center Police Station for interviewing. While interviewed, OJ explained that him and Nicole had tried to get back together, but that it wasn't working out. When Lang had asked OJ what he thought had happened, OJ said the police hadn't told him anything. During this initial interview, Lang happened to notice that OJ's finger was bleeding. Then, they had the jail nurse photograph and take care of the finger. They knew in this moment that the finger could match up to the blood spots that were found next to the shoe prints at the Bundy crime scene. When they asked OJ how he cut his finger, OJ said that he didn't know how he got it. Then, somewhere along the line, he would tell the detectives that he got it when he broke a glass in Chicago when he found out about Nicole. Lang noticed that he was already changing his story. In Chicago, they found a towel with blood smeared on it. During the same interview, he changed his finger story again, saying that he may have already cut the finger and then maybe the glass reopened it. Then OJ said that he did remember bleeding from his house to the Bronco. See, this is what pisses me off. I mean, Lang noticed and commented about how much OJ was already changing his story about his finger anyways, but he wouldn't have had the thought to say something about the blood trail from his house to the Bronco if that stupid officer wouldn't have given away some of the evidence they had. Like, why would you do that? I mean, I'm just a podcaster, so what the hell do I know? But wouldn't you want to keep the information close to the chest to see if this matched up with his first story and not give away your hand? I hear often in true crime the dozens of jokes and laughability of the LAPD, like it's been a thing in true crime for a long time. And until this case, I never really understood why, but now I get it. They are apparently known for mishandling cases and corruption. I hope now in 2025 that this has changed for them because apparently they need to get their shit together. When Lang asked during the interview if OJ would be willing to take a polygraph, he said something about how he might down the line and then said, quote, "But now I've got some weird thoughts now," end quote. OJ's blood sample was taken to be tested against the blood in the Bronco. 2 days after the murder, OJ made an announcement that he would be changing lawyers, and now he was hiring a man that was a celebrity attorney who was known for making great deals for the rich and famous clients, Robert Shapiro. Ron Shipp, officer of the LAPD and longtime friend of OJ, called OJ and asked if he should swing by after work, and OJ said yeah. When Shipp got there, he noticed the cut on his finger, and he asked him how he cut it. OJ apparently told Shipp that he cut it while he was reaching into the Bronco for some stuff and got blood in it. Shipp thought nothing of this until another person entered the house and gave his hellos to OJ, and then he too asked what happened to his finger. And this time, OJ said the thing about the glass in Chicago. Shipp said that he was taken aback, like what the fuck just happened? Why would he change his story? Then OJ, before Shipp left, asked how long it would take DNA to get back, which Shipp thought was weird and was like, why would he be asking him that? After this, OJ asked Shipp about the polygraph, and when Shipp asked OJ why he wouldn't want to take the polygraph, OJ responded with, quote, "I've had dreams about killing her." He said he got the hell out of OJ's house, and on the way home, he cried and called his wife because in that moment, he knew his friend OJ was guilty. It wasn't the first time that he knew OJ put hands on Nicole. Apparently, Nicole had called Shipp a while back, and when he was first at Nicole's, she told him about the domestic abuse and showed him the pictures and told Shipp that OJ was not a good man and asked if he would talk to OJ. When Shipp went to OJ and asked if he had hit or slapped her, apparently OJ said that it was Nicole that was the aggressor and that he had just held her back. When the blood came back, it showed that OJ's blood was at the scene, the drops of blood. In the Bronco, there was found to be Nicole's blood, OJ's blood, and Ron's blood. Also, the right-handed glove that was found behind the bungalow had both victims' blood on it. The socks found at the foot of the bed had also been completely drenched in Nicole's blood. Slam dunk, right? It doesn't take the best detective in the world to figure out from the blood alone that OJ killed Ron and Nicole. When the warrant was issued for OJ's arrest, he was supposed to turn himself in at 10 a.m. that morning at Central Park. And although Lang just wanted to go get him, he spoke to the fact that the higher-ups and the media wanted their perp walk moment where he would be walking in to get arrested. OJ never showed up. So I'm not going to go over the entire white Bronco chase because this is already long. I did want to include some bits about it and from the trial, but I mainly wanted to focus on the murders themselves and all the evidence that was stacked against OJ. When OJ didn't turn himself in, a BOLO was issued and OJ was now considered a fugitive of the law. A few things to note about the Bronco chase was that a woman and her husband were using their personal helicopter and happened to spot the Bronco that they believed OJ was in, which, by the way, was not his own Bronco. Nope, the police still had his Bronco, but apparently OJ's good friend Al Cowlings, known as AC, also had a white Bronco, and this is what they were fleeing in. Cops pursued the white Bronco, but when Lang called OJ, he picked up, and he was threatening to commit suicide with the gun that he had to his own head. Lang was able to talk down OJ from doing that and said to think about his kids and his family, and OJ said all he wanted to do was talk to his mother at his home. The pursuit of OJ, AC, and the white Bronco became a media spectacle, with vehicles stopping all over the interstate or anywhere that was even close so people could get a glance at the chase. This would become a racial matter, which it was explained at the time by one of OJ's defense attorneys, Mr. Douglas, who was part of Johnny Cochran's team, that this was not long after the Rodney King riots and quickly became a racial matter. I have to admit that I had heard of the Rodney King incident and the riots, but I didn't know enough. After I learned and saw what happened, I was absolutely appalled. And then to hear that the police officers got off on the charge made me sick. If you haven't seen those videos, you absolutely need to go check them out. So as far as OJ went, a lot of people believed that OJ was being set up or framed by the police and wanted him to get away. Surrounding OJ's home were hundreds and hundreds of people. When the white Bronco finally pulled up to the residence, SWAT actually had a hard time getting there, and the orders that were to the authorities were that if OJ got out of the Bronco with the gun, he would most likely be shot. AC came out, and eventually OJ was called while still in the Bronco and negotiated him coming inside, and the authorities said they could even make it look good and that they would shake his hand, he could come inside as long as he left the weapon in the car. OJ, by all accounts of people around him, especially his sports agent who stuck by his side until after the trial, Mike Gilbert, OJ cared deeply about how he looked to people. Mike was quite a bit a part of the documentary, and what he had to say at the end was very interesting. When OJ finally got out of the Bronco, he was arrested once he was inside of his home. OJ's enormous defense team consisted of Bob Shapiro, John A. Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz and his class at Harvard Law, Barry Scheck and Peter Newfield, who were both DNA experts, and all in all, there was said to be 16 to 17 people on the quote-unquote dream team. During the trial, the first DA to come on the case was Marcia Clark, and then all of a sudden her partner was taken off the case because of alleged chest pains, and a black DA by the name of Chris Darden was assigned to the case, in which he absolutely did not want to be involved. In fact, this case was called a clusterfuck on the documentary. Chris Darden is another man that I absolutely loved on the documentary, as he was funny and also a straight shooter. When many people believed that Chris was brought in on the DA team because he was black and that the DA didn't want an all-white team prosecuting a black male, O.J. Simpson, he disagreed and said it was because he was good at what he did and he usually won his cases. It could have been a mix of both, but many thought it was because he was a black man. Right out of the gate, the defense team started pointing fingers at Mark Furman, one of the first detectives that we know was on the scene and had found the second glove that was located at Rockingham and was in charge of getting pictures of the first one at the Bundy residence. Well, unfortunately, when they put Furman on the stand and asked him if it was true in the past that he was known to be a racial officer using racial slurs, he denied it up and down. He had later admitted that he was an angrier younger man and would be caught in a lie where he would actually be charged with perjury later on. When tapes of Mark Fuhrman would later be discovered and the jury would hear a portion of these tapes, which, let me tell you, were absolutely horrific and disgusting and honestly hard to listen to about how he felt about black men and women. This had a direct effect on the case, understandably. Unfortunately, when this happened, the case seemed to shift from the O.J. trial to what people referred to as the Mark Fuhrman trial. He would later be put on the stand after the tapes came out to ask him questions where his attorney advised him to plead the fifth. And when one question came up and asked if he had planted any evidence in the case, he again said he wanted to plead the fifth. And this is what sealed it for some of the jury members. The jury was said to be made up of 8 black men and women, 1 white person, 1 Latino person, and 2 people of mixed race. It was said the jury had to fill out a 79-page questionnaire, and it took 2 weeks just to pick out the jury. Apparently, when O.J. saw the jury selection, he said, quote, "If this jury convicts me, maybe I did do it." The judge in this case gave permission for cameras to be allowed into the trial, and this is why it became a national sensation, and everyone became obsessed with the O.J. case and the following of the trial. The prosecution tried to heavily rely on the domestic charge and the numerous 911 calls. It was said that many people didn't want to testify against O.J. This included his buddy from the LAPD, Ron Shipp. However, when one of the detectives called Shipp in to speak with him, the detective had to leave the room and left Shipp in the room alone with photographs that had been taken of the murder scene and the victims. And this is when Shipp realized that Nicole was basically chopped up and knew it was O.J. who had done it, so he had to do it. When the detective came back in, Shipp immediately said he would testify. If this was done on purpose to persuade Shipp, it worked. And good for him, because I know that he said it was a weird thing to have to do since O.J. was his friend and he still had love for the man, but he had to do it for Nicole, and he did. Even O.J.'s sports agent Mike Gilbert said you had to give him respect for doing that. The prosecution related their theories on what they thought happened, that O.J. went to Nicole's house and then he attacked her. When Ron showed up, evidence showed that he may have cradled Nicole's head in his lap until he too was attacked by O.J. Nicole woke up, and this is when O.J. slit her throat horrifically, nearly decapitating her. Denise Brown took the stand and repeated an incident that had happened where they were all together drinking and dancing and having a good time. At one point in the evening, O.J. grabbed Nicole's genitals and said, quote, "This is where babies come from and this belongs to me," end quote. Gross. I fucking hate that misogynistic, like, this is mine or you are mine attitude. Motherfucker, I am my own and I do not belong to anyone, so you can go fuck yourself with that bullshit. Nothing on my body belongs to you or anyone else, you chauvinistic prick. Poor Nicole. After this comment and gross display by O.J., I guess Denise said something to O.J. about how he took advantage of Nicole. And this is when O.J. would grab Nicole and throw her up against a wall in front of everyone. What the fuck? That's so sad and so embarrassing for her and in front of her own family. This monster should have been locked up a long time ago. Domestic abuse is no joke and can end just like poor Nicole's story. And poor Ron, he didn't even do anything wrong. He was just being a nice guy, dropping off some glasses for Nicole's mother, and was slaughtered by O.J. in what was probably a jealous rage. Many people close to O.J. and Nicole spoke to the fact that O.J. didn't seem to take it very well that Nicole could move on without him. Tom Lang, one of the detectives, was put on the stand about how the authorities never considered another suspect in the case. Tom very plainly said they would have if any of the evidence pointed them anywhere else, but everything obviously pointed to O.J. On the documentary, Lang said that O.J. didn't like that Nicole called him out on his shit and challenged him. Mr. Douglas, one of the defense lawyers, talked to the fact that on the defense team they really wanted to play up the mistrust of the LAPD within the community as well as push the fact that Goldman could have been a drug user and the authorities didn't even look into his background, where this could have been a drug-related crime. It was bullshit and everyone knew it. It still planted that seed of doubt in the jury's mind. Of course, they also used Fuhrman's racist tapes and actions and also planted doubt that maybe Fuhrman planted the evidence. He didn't, and it's clear that he didn't, but once he had lied about the racist stuff, he couldn't be trusted. He should have just been honest and said that he used to be an ignorant piece of shit. You would still be hated for the filthy, disgusting human being you are, but at least you would have owned your shit and not been a coward. He fucked up the trial with his nonsense. The defense also used some video footage of the crime scene and evidence that wasn't collected perfectly and tried to say that there were blood drops and smears that were planted, etc. But it's all, in my opinion, and in many others, nonsense, and all put out there to veer away from the scientific DNA evidence that was relatively new at this point that showed exactly what had happened that night. One other thing that the defense had in their corner was that the blanket that was used to cover up Nicole could have had OJ's DNA on it from inside, like his hairs or whatever, and then they tried to say that this contaminated Nicole's body DNA evidence. Why this is stupid is because both victims' blood was in OJ's Bronco, his own blood was at the crime scene, and the blood everywhere that matched OJ and Nicole and Ron was pointed out in the civil suit later on. And when OJ was questioned, he couldn't explain why any of it was there. And of course, he was found to be responsible for Nicole and Ron's death and owed those families a ton of money that he never paid. But the families felt that they got a jury to finally say that he was guilty, and that was something. Now we're going to get to the infamous gloves that OJ tried on in court, and this would prove to be detrimental to this case and may have lost it for the prosecution. Chris Darden was hilarious during the new documentary where he said that he was married to those fucking gloves for the rest of his life and even joked that he had said to bury him with a fucking pair of isotoners. It was his decision to have OJ try on the gloves that day in court to show that they fit. I think it was a good idea. Here's a few things to keep in mind because while I was watching this, I was thinking, I remember always hearing that the gloves didn't fit. And I thought, well, if OJ had like a ton of salt that day or something, his fingers would be a little bit swollen. Maybe that's what he did. Nope, turns out that his own sports agent, Mike, told OJ if he was worried about the gloves fitting, to just not take his arthritis medication before the trial started. When OJ said that would cause his knuckles to swell up and be big, Mike shrugged his shoulders, seemingly saying like, so what? Even better. When the judge allowed OJ to try on the gloves, and these were the gloves from the crime scene, he made OJ wear a latex pair of gloves underneath, which made it really hard for OJ to pull them on. However, some people in the courtroom felt like OJ was pretending to pull them on and pull them down over the latex gloves, but couldn't. And what made me laugh so hard was that they did sort of fit fine on OJ's hand, despite the latex gloves. Like, they're a tight fit, but he was known for wearing those kind of gloves in pictures and stuff. And when talking about this, Chris said, they fucking fit, even though it's been widely discussed that they didn't fit. That is what sealed a lot of jury's mind, that the actual gloves from the case wouldn't fit OJ. Lang made a comment that these were damp with blood and had probably even shrank, but you can see that he was actually able to get them on in the trial. Without his arthritis medicine and with the latex gloves on, they really did fit onto his hands. When the jury was sent to deliberate, everybody thought that because the trial had lasted 8 months, which, by the way, the jury at this point had to be sequestered. So they were not happy about being away from work and family for 8 months at this point. That their deliberation would take 2 to 3 weeks long at least. Nope, it was 4 hours. One juror said that the first vote they took was 10-2 for acquittal, and within a few hours the next vote, it was unanimous. They knew everyone would be shocked, and usually a fast deliberation is bad for the defense, but in this case, it was not. OJ was found not guilty of both murders. Ron's sister Kim said that she felt everyone was too afraid to convict OJ, maybe because of the racist aspects of the case. Right after the decision, Ron Shapiro went on an interview saying that he felt that the defense team, so his own team, used the race card, and not only did they use it, but he said they dealt it from the bottom of the deck, basically destroying his own team for how they handled the case. Even Mr. Douglas, one of the defense attorneys, said that he can understand someone saying that it was more likely that OJ was responsible for the deaths of Nicole and Ron, rather than less likely. A few years later, OJ would be arrested and put in prison for 9 years for robbery in Florida when he was then paroled. He said that he was just trying to take back some of his own memorabilia, and OJ was now a pariah or outcast in the public eye. Good, he should be. OJ would go on to die in April of 2024, so just last year at the age of 76 from a battle with cancer. I am going to leave this case with a final tidbit from OJ's sports agent, Mike Gilbert, who, as I said before, was always on his side. One night, years later, they were drinking and hanging out at OJ's house, and as they were sitting together, Mike asked OJ what really happened the night of Nicole's murder. OJ then asked Mike what he thought happened. Mike said he actually always thought that OJ did it. Then OJ said to him, quote, If Nicole wouldn't have opened the door with that knife, she would still be alive today. End quote. Mike then quit his job with OJ. And that, my friends, is the story of Orenthal James Simpson, NFL star, wife beater, and murderer. So it was so weird that the sports agent said that, because the whole time I was watching this new documentary, I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if like the whole time Mike Gilbert had his back and was like a big part of this story, and then at the end he was just like, oh, he was definitely guilty. Like, what a big twist that would be. And then sure as shit, he said OJ told him about if Nicole wouldn't have opened the door with the knife. Now, this could also just be his story, OJ's, because there was said to be a knife box found on the side of the bathtub at OJ's home that never made it into evidence. I personally feel that this was not only premeditated because he bought the stuff and he knew that he would have a little bit of an alibi if he was on a plane to Chicago, but also because he had been stalking her and skulking around her house for months and months, and he was so damn abusive. His blood was everywhere, and so were the victims. I think there are so many angles that played into this case that the prosecution just didn't do a good enough job helping the jury see through the bullshit to look at the science. And I definitely believe that the witnesses not being called about seeing OJ at the LAX airport, and that witness who saw him at the intersection not being able to testify, also the numerous items of evidence that failed to make it into the case, just showed how botched this whole case really was. And that's so unfortunate, because he got to live out the rest of his days being a fucking murderer. He quite literally, in my opinion, got away with murder, and it's horrible. Nicole and Ron did not deserve what happened to them. I hope you guys come on back next Monday for another episode here on The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop, either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on the Kill File socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how The Kill File got started, and you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There is contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix, when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.